for the welcome, and I'm so delighted to be back in Bulawayo and to discover that Bulawayo is alive. Sometimes those of us who live in Harare think that Bulawayo is actually dead. We hear so little from the city. The 2025 budget was a very tough call. The situation in which the Minister found himself was with huge demands on the Treasury and very little space to manoeuvre in terms of the revenue being achieved by the Treasury. And I think that we have to start out by basically accepting that fact. The fundamentals in the budget are very, very difficult. 55% of the budget is being spent on salaries and salary benefits and pensions, and that's a much higher figure than his target, which was 35% some years ago. 35% is about what other countries in the developed world spend on salaries and wages in the civil service. So we have a very big burden in the form of our civil service. I don't know what our numbers stand by, but I heard a figure of 400,000 civil servants. At independence, we had a civil service, including the armed forces, of 67,000 people. I understand that we have over 300,000 pensioners. And I did mention to the Minister that it was time we had a proof of life survey on the government pensions. I've been a parliamentary pensioner now for 6 years, and I haven't been asked once for a proof of life. And I'm an old mutual pensioner, and I gladly collect my $10 a month from them. But let me tell you, they're absolutely persistent. I have to prove that I'm alive every year, or else this wretched small pension of mine, after 65 years of contribution, will cease. But apart from that, the revenue collections of government at about 20% of the GDP is pretty much average for Africa. In fact, many African states collect significantly less than that. I've heard of an average for Africa as a whole of about 16%. So in fact, our tax authorities do rather well in terms of collecting tax from our population. And at 20%, it's really not that much of a burden on the private sector. We might think that we are very, very heavily taxed, but I think the level of tax burden varies from sector to sector. I think that employees are very heavily taxed. I think that the fact that our PAYE starts at a miserable $100 a month and at 20% and goes up to 40% on a salary of about $5,000 a month is indicative of that. And I would like to suggest to the Minister that he seriously considers increasing the tax-free limit on PAYE and increasing the tax on the higher level. If you're earning $20,000 or $30,000, or in one case I've heard $50,000 a month as a chief executive, believe me, you should be paying about 50% tax. Whereas at the bottom level, it's the 80-20 principle. 80% of the PAYE comes from 20% of the taxpayers. And by taxing the lower level heavily, and it is a heavy tax, the President, I was in the House of Assembly when the Minister was presenting his budget, and he referred to the conversion of the PAYE tax into ZIG as being a significant reduction in the charge, and that's not right. He didn't change the basic tax at all. All he was doing was converting it at the newly depreciated ZIG rate. Rather a slay of hand. He got a clap, he got a round of applause for that, one of the few that he received during his presentation. So I think that the budget, in fact, was not particularly pro-poor. I think he could have done better in that particular area. For example, if you did increase the PAYE tax-free ceiling significantly, it would put a significant amount of additional spending power into the marketplace for the benefit of the wider economy. And given the multiplier effect of that kind of expenditure, it would mean that the general economy would in fact be significantly improved. Apart from those major issues, I think he did rather well on the allocation of resources. For the first time, I think we've hit the 15% on health, and certainly we hit the 20% on education. And the problem with these kind of proportions of a tax, if your tax base is small, and ours is tiny, and you're not able to generate the kind of resources that we need to meet the needs of the country, spending 15% of your tax base on health and 20% on education in other countries might mean that you can do a decent job. Here it doesn't. The allocation on primary education is $20 per month per child. It's just peanuts. You can't educate a child properly with that kind of money. The diaspora helps, and I think diaspora contributions to education in this country actually exceed the contribution of the fiscus. The next point, the only major other point I want to make, given the time limits that I have, is this whole question of informalization. I don't think that our GDP is $38 billion. It could easily be closer to $100 billion. Instead of our GDP being 2 or 3% of the economy of South Africa, it could be close to 10%. And the reason for this is that we have this grey economy. I mean, the fact that the Americans imposed sanctions on 29 people here last weekend for their activities in the gold sector indicates to you just what is happening there. The main focus of that was an Indian gentleman who's been living in Harare since he fled Kenya on corruption charges, who I know handled 30 tons of gold last year from drivers who were traveling through Zimbabwe, having come from the Congo or Zambia. And that's a tiny proportion. The Dubai gold market says that they received, without any certificates of origin last year, 450 tons of gold from Africa. And we were one of the biggest sources. That means our gold industry is substantially bigger than we estimate at the moment. It could easily be worth $10 billion a year. And only 10% of that is being traded domestically. This is what we call leakages. We've done a calculation on that. We know what the small-scale miners are being paid, about 55% of the value of gold. So this means that about $5 billion a year is being externalized. It's being externalized. And if you want to see evidence of that, just look at this guy, Wicknell, dishing out motor cars, building stadiums. Where does that money come from? His brother was caught in Rand the other day selling 15 million rands worth of gold on the street. He was detained for a short while and then released. And you know, if you have shrinkages like that, we pointed out to the minister that at $500 million, total collections on customs duty represents a tiny proportion of what he should be collecting. Last year, we imported $3 billion worth of cars. Just work out the duty that should have been paid on that flow of... I urged CZI in Harare a couple of years ago to do a calculation of how much tax should be, how much customs duty should be being collected at the border, because we know what's coming through. They didn't do it. But I'm telling you that we could at least treble the amount of customs duty we collect if the system wasn't so porous. And I hear disturbing reports that officials are accountable for this. The other major shrinkage here is in fuel. We've reported that to the President. The Minister knows exactly what the situation is. But we estimate that up to 40 cents of every liter of fuel that you buy at a pump is being diverted by the private sector. That's $1.2 billion a year more than he's collecting on duties and levies on fuel. The duty and levy on fuel is 52 cents. We consumed this year 3.8 billion litres of fuel. Do the calculation, and then look at his numbers. $1 billion extra revenue on fuel account alone. Guys, we have got to start paying attention to corruption. We have got to start working on these leakages from our economy. We are a rich country made poor by bad governance.